computer. Hello, hello. Welcome to Woman of Grit Podcast. Pat Backley, all the way from New Zealand. How are things in tomorrow?
Oh, they're great, actually. Yes, I can highly recommend tomorrow. The sun's shining and no, it's good. But thank you very much for having me on your show. I'm delighted to be here.
It's my pleasure. So before we go forward, how would you like me to address you? Pat or Miss Backley or Pat Backley or?
Just Pat is
Just
great.
Pat. Okay, great. So please tell our listeners how we know each other. I'm in the US, you're in New Zealand.
Okay. Well, I guess it's all down to COVID, really, because it's just been wonderful too. I was approached. I became an author 2 years ago, and I was approached by a lady called Dr. Lulu, who I met through author channels, to say that she was going to write an anthology, and would I be interested? And it was all about immigrant women. Well, you can probably tell by my accent that I'm English, but I emigrated to New Zealand 12 years ago, so I technically count as an immigrant. But when she introduced me to the other authors of this anthology, I just nearly freaked out because I thought, oh, how can I be in any way suitable to be on this platform with these fabulous women? 21 women, all high-powered doctors, blah, blah, blah. I felt very inadequate. But anyway, I became a warrior woman, as in this book, and that's where I met you, Dr. Arns. So I'm thrilled, because without COVID and without me starting writing, which would happen at the same time, our paths would almost never have crossed. So I'm delighted that they did.
So as you heard Pat talk about that anthology, that's how we met. I am a warrior woman. I am one of the 21 women that she met writing that book. We haven't actually met in person. It's been Zoom calls and WhatsApp messages. And I'm hoping once everything settles down with COVID, hopefully monkeypox doesn't get crazy, but we can actually have a reunion where most of us meet. So, like you heard already in her brief bio, Pat has written 7 books. And talking about books, Pat, can you take a guess which 2 of your books, your solo books, I have with me right now?
Oh, I can't really guess. You might have my 2 latest, or I guess you've probably got the 70 years worth of travel, because that's one of my latest, and that's pretty interesting. You might even have my first baby called Daisy, which is very dear to my heart. Or perhaps you've got, what else might you have? My personal memoirs that tells you about my life story. I don't know.
Actually, you're right. I do have 70 years worth of travel, your most recent book, and also From There to Here, your memoir. So, and the reason is because I love to travel. Just like we'll find out a little bit about you. So those 2 books were like the first of your books that I was drawn to, because when I can travel, I travel vicariously through other people who are traveling. I'm either looking at their pictures, I'm reading the stories of their trips, and I'm literally immersed in their experience. So yes, you got it. You got both books that I have here with me today. I consider myself a hodophile, which is a lover of travel. So I guess you're a hodophile too.
I am.
Of course,
Absolutely.
I was drawn to your memoirs, From There to Here, and your most recent book, 70 Years Worth of Travel. So we're going to dive right into it, Pat. So where did you grow up, and how did that affect who you became, this woman you are today?
Okay, well, funnily enough, just yesterday, I posted something on Facebook. I found an old photograph of my sister and I. We were wearing these party dresses that my mum had made. Now, I came from a very poor background in England, just grew up in a little rural village, but we were poor. But I didn't know we were poor until I was 11 and I went to the big school. And I suddenly was introduced to all these girls who came from much wealthier homes than me. So that in itself shaped my life. You know, being poor and suddenly realizing that not everyone was poor, that came as a shock to me, because I just assumed that everyone else only had one new dress a year if they were very lucky, and the rest of the time they wore hand-me-downs. Now, as a 71-year-old, I'm still that little girl in my head. I'm still that little girl from the council house with no money. But in the intervening years, I've been up and down, and I've had money and I haven't had money. And I realized that actually you are what you are. You are the person you are, but life just shapes you a little bit. Yeah.
So I suspect I know what you're passionate about, but I may be wrong. So I'm going to ask the question anyway. What are you passionate about, and what gets you motivated?
Okay, I think the thing I'm most passionate about is that everyone in the world is equal. That's my big thing, and that's a theme that comes through in all my books, whether they're fiction or non-fiction. Even as a tiny little girl, I hated any sort of injustice or inequality. And as I've got older, obviously, that's become more of a thing. So I would say that's my passion. My other big passion, well, obviously writing has become a huge passion, but my other passion is my daughter, my only child, aged 28, but she's still my baby. Yeah, I'm passionate about, Dr. Ahne, I'm passionate about so many things. I mean, I could give you a list a yard long. I'm sitting here looking at my new garden I created, and I do a bit of painting, and I obviously write, and I love interior design, and I love people. And yeah, I could talk forever.
I was thinking about travel, and I get that about being passionate about your daughter, because I have one child too. He's a boy. He's a son. So I am pretty passionate about him. I spend his schedule is my schedule on top of my schedule. And so I am pretty busy with him. And I often ask myself, how do people have more than one child? I'm barely making it with one child. I'm so involved in his activities. So, what was the most significant challenge or turning point in your life, Beth?
I think probably I got married for the first time 2 weeks after my 20th birthday. That was a huge turning point for me, because until that point, I thought everyone in the world was lovely. You know, I mean, I'd been bullied a bit at school because I was poor and stuff like that. But basically, I thought the world was full of lovely people, like my own family. Then I married a man who actually wasn't so lovely. So within 3 days, that was a real turning point for me. And I guess that kind of started my backbone. You know, it started making me a bit tougher, because until that point, I hadn't needed to be tough. You know, I had a loving family, I had a job, blah, blah, blah. So I think that was probably the first thing. The other real turning point for me was when I was 26, I went to live in the Fiji Islands in the South Pacific. I'm from England. That was kind of as far as you could possibly go. And at that time in the 50s in England, there were very few people with skin darker than mine. Very few. And I went to Fiji, and I remember getting off the plane, and I just thought, oh my God, they're so beautiful, because Fijians are very attractive people. And that was a huge turning point for me, because these people then became my family, and 46 years on, they're still my family. And I think for me, that kind of summed up everything that I'd always believed, that we were all, no matter where you live in the world, what your culture is, what your color is, we are all just people, good and bad.
So before you got to Fiji, had you had any misconceptions, or had you grown up thinking or hearing about the color of people's skin, making them different, and finding out that maybe that was not true? Or how was it before you actually met the Fijians?
Yeah, well, when I grew up, I mean, I was in a little village, and of course there was no internet and stuff at the time. And I think there were two channels on the television, and we didn't have a television until I was about 15 anyway. So you were very limited. The only experience I'd had at that point was occasionally going to London, and on the London Underground there were a few, mostly West Indians. And I can remember being with my uncle who worked for London Transport, and he introduced me to this man, and I was probably, I don't know, 9 or 10. And I looked up at this guy. He was very tall, and I looked up and I said to him, "Oh, you're so beautiful." And of course, this man just burst out laughing because
Laughing.
I'd never been in the proximity of anyone darker than me before. But I had always loved things like Uncle Tom's Cabin as a little girl, that book. And so that kind of gave me a bit of an understanding. And obviously, I remember one year at Sunday school, the vicar said, "Oh, next week we're going to have a collection for African children." And of course, I had really no concept what African children was. And I went home and I said to Mum, "Oh, we've got to take a present for African children next week. I think I'll give my sooty puppet or something," which had like one ear missing and blah, blah. And I think I was 7. And she sat me down and she said, "Pat, giving is about something you value. It's not giving if you give something that's kind of old and worn out." She said, "Think about something you want to give." And the previous Christmas, I'd been given off on my birthday a little black doll, which was very unusual in those days.
Right,
In England, there
right.
was no such thing. And I loved this doll. And I kept looking at her, and I had no toys really. I mean, I had nothing. But my black doll was very precious. And I went downstairs and I said to Mum, "I think I'll give my black doll." And I was in tears. And she said, and I'll always be grateful to her for this, she said, "That's good, love." She said, shall I knit her some pretty clothes?" So she knitted this little pink dress. And I remember going to Sunday school and walking up to the front, and the vicar put it under the Christmas tree. And I was in tears. I was distraught at giving away my doll. And then he started talking about all the little African children that would be so happy on Christmas morning to open their parcels. And I was fine then. I thought, oh, actually, I've done some good. So I will always be grateful to my mother for explaining to me that giving is only giving if it's a slight sacrifice to you. But I still didn't really know much about anyone who was black. So yes, going to Fiji was a huge eye-opener for me, because it just made me realize that skin color is irrelevant. It just makes no difference at all. And some of my dearest friends are, yeah, different color to me. But
So from a really young age, you became aware of fairness, what was right from what
totally,
was wrong. And I have to say kudos to your mother for really instilling that thing in you, because a lot of times now when a child is involved in a racist incident or uses a derogatory racist term, the first thing we say is they learned it at home.
oh,
So we
definitely.
see how your mom's influence on you really helped to make you who you are today.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely, definitely. Yeah.
Okay. So, regarding your life as an author, you published your first book at the age of 70. So, if there's anyone out there listening who says, "I can't start this or I can't start that, I am maybe too old, or, I would have done it if I were younger," listen, she wrote her first book at age 70. That was in 2020.
Yep. Yep.
And you've written 6 more books since then.
Yep.
How, Pat?
And
Yeah.
I have another one already at the editors,
Oh,
already with the editor
so
in the
her 8th
States.
is at the editors.
Yeah, and 2 more in the writing stage. And I've just contributed to another anthology that's coming out next month. So yeah, it's Dr. Ahne, it's like someone's taken the top of my head off and all these words are just flying out, because I just find it so easy. Someone said to me the other day, "Oh, Pat, you couldn't write me a short story." 2 hours later, it was done, gone, finished. So I just love my new author career. I mean, it has made my life complete. It's wonderful. And it started, would you like to know how it started?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead. That's why I'm not saying anything. I'm just talking.
It started quite by chance. We went into lockdown, and because here in New Zealand we kind of locked down straight away. You probably are aware, which was great at the time, but now it's backfired because now we've opened the borders. We've got masses of cases. But anyway, at the time we went into lockdown on my birthday. And I was all alone. My daughter was living and working in London, and my husband of 26 years had just dumped me the year before. So I was all alone, pretty fed up. So I spent the first 3 weeks of lockdown just lying on the sofa, eating too much chocolate and watching rubbish on Netflix. And then one day I thought, Pat, this is ridiculous. You're just wasting your life. You know, you don't know how much life you've got left. Just get on with it. Why don't you write a book? So I did. I got some paper and I wrote this book, Daisy, in just 3 weeks, because it had obviously all been in my head without me realizing it. And yeah, that's what started me. So very exciting.
So, we talk about in life, we talk about your mindset, and one of the things in growth mindset versus fixed mindset, people with growth mindset consider failure, quote unquote failure, as lessons. They learn something from it. It's not a marker of who they are, their worth. They just learn something from it. So going back, you talked about your ex-husband had just dumped you and you were feeling sorry for yourself. And let me tell you, there's nothing like some good chocolate. Okay. I also use chocolate therapy. Do you think that freeing of your words would have occurred if that dump hadn't taken place?
No, absolutely, definitely not. And I'll tell you how I know, because I've had 2 husbands. I'm not very good at this. I've had 2 husbands and two divorces, not intentionally. The first one was 14 years and I really tried hard, although he was a bit violent and stuff. The second one was 26 years. So I have done my bit, but no more husbands. Yes, now your question was, sorry.
Would it have happened?
Oh, no.
He hadn't, if
No.
husband number 2 had not removed himself.
It definitely wouldn't have happened for 2 reasons. One, time. When you've got a husband, you kind of don't have heaps of time. And the second reason is he always made me feel inadequate. He was a teacher and he used to say things like, oh, it's such a shame you had to leave school when you were 16 and didn't go to university because you're quite bright, really. Well, that's kind of a put down, which, being quite bright really is not the same as, oh my God, you're clever, you're wonderful. So no, he always made me feel like I wasn't good enough. So no, I never would have done. So he's done me a great
favor. Can you imagine?
Favor, that's the word. Yes. Yeah.
So, but a lot of times too, when people put other people down, they're really projecting.
Oh yes.
So there is a meme on social media that I really like. It says, am I intimidating or are you intimidated? Yes. I think that person who is putting you down really is projecting how they feel about themselves. And it's often not about you. Mm-hmm. It's about them. And I understand that because in my previous relationship, the put downs were kind of, for example, if we're having an argument and he would address me as Dr. Burnley, and I would be like, oh, in the beginning, I used to feel bad about it. And finally, I was like, oh, yeah, I am. I did go to medical school. But you're feeling inadequate. And then you turn around and try to make me feel bad so you can feel better about yourself. And I think a lot of times we as women, we will contort ourselves into the most intricate pretzel to get somebody else to feel better about themselves. And ultimately, it never works. It doesn't matter what you do. If that person doesn't feel adequate, there's nothing you can do. Nothing, absolutely nothing. There will always be another reason. You know,
Yes.
you do it the way they said you should have done it, then, you know, the game keeps changing, the rules keep changing. So I'm just saying this, it wasn't about you, it was about them. And look at
Exactly.
you now. You left school at 16 and you have 7 published books. You have an
Yeah.
8th at the editor, and you have 2 more brewing.
Yep.
All within 2 years. I mean,
Yep.
I think you're brilliant. I really absolutely think you're brilliant.
Oh, thank
I
you.
think you're brilliant, and there's no way around that. So
Oh,
we're talking about your life as an author, you know, 6 books out, 7 books out, the 8th at the editors, 2 more brewing. So the book that I was just fascinated with because I love to travel is your most recent book, 70 Years Worth of Travel. And I am going to go to chapter 4, Tunisia, and that's on page 13. And I'm going to read what really caught my attention. And, you know, you say towards the end, I can still remember the scent of the jasmine as we walked in the evening along the dusty road leading to the nearest restaurant. I was hooked. Travel was my absolute passion. As I was reading that, I could literally smell jasmine. Like I tell you, I like to travel through other people. Now I'm traveling through your words. And I can just imagine the smell. You're walking along this dusty road. I've walked along many a dusty roads in my life
yeah.
and going to a restaurant. And that just grabbed me. I think that is the power of words, that I can transport myself to Tunisia, a country I've never been to. And just backtracking a little bit, the listeners who listened to previous episodes and the trailer know I introduced to them, I said I needed to address the elephant in the room. So for the listeners who this is the very first episode that they're listening to, I suggest you go back to episode 1 on the trailer and you would know, because I know you're wondering, where's that accent from? So I'm originally from Cameroon, and that's in Africa. So when I read about Tunisia, a country I've never been to, I literally could put myself in Tunisia. So do you still feel that way? You were hooked and travel was your absolute passion. Do you still feel that way about travel?
Oh, absolutely, totally. It's just one of, I just, when I was a little girl, and I think I do talk about it at the beginning of this book, there was no internet, but I was a great reader. I used to walk with my dad half an hour to the local library, and I would get out all the big reference books that you weren't allowed to take away, and pore over them, all these countries and these different things. And I used to get so excited. And then Mum and Dad bought an atlas for us to have at home. And it sounds really silly talking about it now. And anyone under the age of, I don't know, 50 who's listening to this will probably think, oh my God, she's talking about the Dark Ages. But in those days, having an atlas in the house when you were a poor family was a huge deal. I mean, it was huge. She bought it from Reader's Digest. I don't know how much it cost. I think she paid for it monthly or something. But it was a big book, quite big. Blue, I can still feel it. It's in my heart. Blue, shiny cover. And we had to ask permission to look at it as kids, and we had to go wash our hands first. I mean, it sounds so funny to talk about that now, but I can remember opening it and seeing these maps of the world and descriptions of different countries. And I thought, oh, I want to do that. But as a little girl, you know, I mean, I never even owned a bicycle till I was 35. There was just no money. So travel just seemed like something that other people did. So, of course, once I was able to do it for myself, it was just like the whole world had opened up to me. And yeah, I'm so passionate about it. I'm passionate about going to a new town. I had to go and do a book talk recently at a town 2 hours away. Oh, you'd have thought I was going to Africa. I was so excited. And yeah, everything's an adventure. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I'm still passionate about travel.
So we're going to take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. And when we come back, I would like to continue on that topic, talking about, your book, going back to that chapter, and we'll be talking about chapter 37. And so I want you to actually read from that chapter. So when we come back.
Okay.